Hello and welcome to the first of many um, F1 content here on the podcast. I did say last week that I would be producing a lot more content as bonus episodes for you to enjoy as the F1 continues to go through to November. Coming up this week, we look at Imola, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and all the previous races that came before Imola and what lies ahead for the teams. But first, we start with Bahrain. That's after this. Charles Leclerc won a blockbuster 2022 Bahrain Grand Prix as Carlos Sainz backed up a Ferrari 1-2, as Red Bull suffered double DNF to give Lewis Hamilton the final podium place in a stunning start to the season. Verstappen, starting in P2, attempted to undercut Ferrari's pole sitter Leclerc on lap 15, cutting down what was a 3.5 deficit to just 0.35 seconds when Leclerc emerged in the lead on lap 16. That triggered a 3-lap box office about for the lead, Leclerc hanging on when Verstappen locked up into turn 1 on lap 19. The second round of pit stops, again catechized by Verstappen, took place on lap 31, but this time Leclerc had a far more comfortable lead. Everything was straightforward until Verstappen pitted on lap 44. 2 laps later, Pierre Gasly brought out the safety car when his AlphaTauri stopped in flames, and Leclerc took the opportunity to pit too. The lap 51 restart saw Leclerc scamper off into the distance, while Verstappen, nursing a steering issue and upset by what he suspected was a power unit glitch, just couldn't keep up. Sainz capitalised on Verstappen's woes and took P2 off the champion on lap 54. Perez and Hamilton followed suit. Having challenged for the lead earlier on, it ended up being a terrible day for the world champion, who ended up retiring at the end of that tour. Hamilton was right on Perez's tail, and then the Mexican began to complain of a power unit issue, and it turned from bad to worse. From the reigning Drivers' Championship winning team when Perez spun at turn 1 when his engine gave way on the final lap, giving Hamilton the final podium place. Russell, who started in 9th, enjoyed superior race pace to the midfielders and took P4 after the Red Bulls retired, ahead of Kevin Magnussen, 5th for Haas on his return to F1. Valtteri Bottas rescued P6 after a poor start for Alfa Romeo, while Esteban Ocon shrugged off a penalty early on for contact with Mick Schumacher to take a surprise 7th. In P8 was AlphaTauri's Yuki Tsunoda, solid on his final stint and in the first restart, while Fernando Alonso shrugged off poor pace in his second stint to take 9th. And on debut, Zhou Guanyu took points for Alfa Romeo, Mick Schumacher missing out in P11. And that seems to be it for Bahrain. Yeah, so these are just going to be, I suppose, short F1 type content to keep you in the loop while F1 is on. I'll have Bahrain and the previous ones up soon. Next up, we'll be talking about the second race in the 2022 calendar. Saudi Arabia. That's next. This week we're talking about Saudi Arabia Grand Prix, the race which followed that of Bahrain. Verstappen beats Leclerc by just by half second in epic Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Red Bull's Max Verstappen won an epic battle over Charles Leclerc in Saudi Arabia, with Carlos Sainz completing the podium behind his Ferrari teammate, as pole sitter Sergio Perez had to settle for fourth after pitting just before a pivotal safety car. Perez led up until lap 16 with a flash of Ferrari mechanics, perhaps triggered Red Bull into an early pit stop. That proved to be unfortunate. Williams' Nicholas Latifi crashed at the final corner on the next lap and triggered a virtual safety car, with Leclerc, Verstappen and Sainz capitalising. The Mexican was set to restart third on lap 21 when the safety car retreated, but was found to have passed Sainz as the Spaniard exited the pits alongside Red Bull during the caution period, leaving the pole sitter fourth. Another virtual safety car emerged on lap 38 when McLaren's Daniel Ricciardo crawled to a halt at the pit exit. Alpine's Fernando Alonso slowing with the problem a lap earlier, and then stopping around the same place as Ricciardo. When the virtual safety car finished on lap 41, Verstappen was within a second of leader Leclerc, and now came round two of their brilliant 2022 rivalry. With DRS, the Dutchman took the lead on the back straight on lap 42, but Leclerc came back with DRS and held onto the lead. Again on lap 43, Verstappen attempted a move but locked up in unison with the Ferrari into the final corner, the Ferrari keeping P1. A brief lull followed and at the start of lap 47, before Verstappen made sure he had DRS and prized the lead off Leclerc, the championship leader unable to close him off this time. Leclerc put in the fastest lap with a second wind in the closing stage, but Verstappen narrowly kept him at bay, shrugging off the scare of a late Sector 1 yellow flag for a Lance Stroll Alex Albon coming together to win by just 0.49 of a second. George Russell took P5 and Esteban Ocon's expense, the Alpine driver having lost out to the Mercedes on lap 3, and then battled with his teammate Alonso, who got a DNF in an exciting early race battle. Ocon, outdragged here for P3 in 2021, kept McLaren's Lando Norris at bay by a tenth of a second on the line in a drag race for P6. Pierre Gasly made up for one place to P8 for AlphaTauri, with the Haas of Kevin Magnussen 9th from 10th on the grid, and Lewis Hamilton, who was unfortunate not to be able to pit during the second virtual safety car, taking the final point from his P15 start for Mercedes. Alfa Romeo's Zhou Guanyu missed out on a second consecutive points finish, receiving two penalties, the first for cutting a corner in an early scrap with Albon, and the second for failing to serve that penalty correctly when he pitted. Albon, Valtteri Bottas, Alonso and Ricciardo were the 5 drivers not to make the flag, with Stroll classified 13th one lap down. Neither Mick Schumacher, who crashed out of qualifying, nor Yuki Tsunoda, whose AlphaTauri stopped with a technical issue on his lap to the grid, started the race. And that's all for Saudi Arabia. We have Australia next after this. Dominant Leclerc beats Perez to Australian Grand Prix win as Verstappen retires. Charles Leclerc won the 2022 Australian Grand Prix to consolidate his and Ferrari's championship leads as Max Verstappen suffered a second retirement in 3 races. Red Bull teammate Sergio Perez finishing second and Mercedes George Russell completing the podium. A capacity crowd descended on Albert Park, Melbourne, hosting its first Australian Grand Prix in 1,100 days. After action-packed free practice and qualifying sessions, they were treated to another thrilling show on Sunday afternoon. Driver of the day, Leclerc kept his rival Verstappen at bay through 2 safety cars. The first when teammate Carlos Sainz spun out from P4 on lap 2 and the second on lap 23 after Sebastian Vettel's crash. The threat dissolved on lap 39 when Verstappen stopped with his engine on fire, allowing the Ferrari driver to cruise to victory over Perez with fastest lap to boot. Russell took P3 after having pitted during the caution for Vettel's crash, Hamilton losing out on another podium by 2 seconds in P4, Mercedes however outscoring Red Bull to retain P2 in the constructors' standings. McLaren were a distant P5 and P6, Lando Norris a few tenths ahead of home hero Daniel Ricciardo in a solid showing for the team in orange, Esteban Ocon 8 seconds back in P7. A penultimate corner lock-up on lap 54 saw AlphaTauri's Pierre Gasly drop out from P8 to P9, while Bottas gained an extra place to take P8, having started in 12th. The Alfa Romeo driver capitalised on Gasly's mistake, Sainz's retirement, and a difficult race for Fernando Alonso, P17, after a late pit stop for fastest lap. One of a handful to start on hards, Alex Albon stopped late before claiming P10 to give Williams a deserved first point of 2022. Zhou Guanyu had a solid 58-lap journey from P14 to P11, missing out on the final point by a whisker to the Willie Williams of Albon ahead. So there you have it. Leclerc beats Perez to Australian Grand Prix win as Verstappen retires his car. Next up we have the Italian Imola Grand Prix. Last weekend, so the F1 teams race at Italy's home ground, particularly where I thought Ferrari would do well, but we shall see what the outcome of that was, if there was an outcome, to a few things that happened there through this idea. So Verstappen leads Red Bull a 1-2 as Ferrari falter in action-packed Imola race. Last weekend, Max Verstappen won a dramatic wet-dry Emilia Romagna Grand Prix over Red Bull teammate Sergio Perez as Ferrari couldn't deliver on home turf. Charles Leclerc spinning late on to finish 6th after Carlos Sainz retired. The Dutchman topped Saturday's sprint and led off the line on Sunday. Teammate Perez joining him at the front, while Leclerc momentarily dropped to 4th. The safety car emerged on the opening lap as Daniel Ricciardo tipped Carlos Sainz into the gravel and out of the race for the second Grand Prix. With the track drying, drivers began to swap from inters to mediums on lap 19. Perez coming in before Verstappen, who led Leclerc into the pits 1 lap later. The Monegasque emerged just ahead of the Mexican, but Perez skated past for P2 with warmer tyres and then kept the Ferrari at bay. A late gamble to pit for softs from P3 from Leclerc saw the Red Bulls follow suit and retain the lead, but on lap 54 again in chase of Perez, the championship leader spun and hit the wall at Variante Alta. He dropped down to 9th, having had to pit for a new nose and softs, and recovered only to P6 at the flag. Lando Norris therefore took the final podium place, promoted twice with Sainz retiring and Leclerc going off track. Mercedes' George Russell enjoyed a brilliant start and was up 7 places to P4 as the checkered flag loomed, holding off Alfa Romeo's Valtteri Bottas by under a second, despite a late duel with the driver he replaced at the Silver Arrows. Yuki Tsunoda finished 7th for AlphaTauri, passing Aston Martin Sebastian Vettel, P8 late on, while Leclerc finished ahead of the pair with his late rescue effort. Haas' Kevin Magnussen ran as high as P5 thanks to another blistering start, but fell down back the order to 9th. Aston Martin's Lance Stroll rounded out the top 10, a double points haul for the team that entered Imola on 0. Alex Albon's solid showing put him at 11th, ahead of AlphaTauri's Pierre Gasly, who couldn't pry his way past even with DRS, which was activated when the track was deemed dry enough on lap 34. Lewis Hamilton was next, the Mercedes driver having been unceremoniously lapped by Verstappen on lap 40 to finish 13th. Esteban Ocon finishing 11th, but dropping to 14th thanks to a 5-second penalty for an unsafe release. Zhou Ganyu started from the pit lane after his sprint crash, the Alfa Romeo driver taking P15 ahead of Williams' Nicholas Latifi. In 17th was Mick Schumacher, the Haas driver having spun twice on Sunday afternoon, while Daniel Ricciardo was last and 18th after his lap tangle with Sainz, pitting again for hards midway through the race in a fruitless strategy. Along with Sainz, compatriot Fernando Alonso was the other DNF, having lost a chunk of his side pod. Schumacher having lost control and hit the Alpine's flanks on lap 1. So there you have it. Verstappen leads Red Bull into a 1-2 as Ferrari falter in action-packed Imola race. That gives 27 points between Ferrari and Red Bull going into Miami next weekend. And that's just about it. That's just about all we have for this race, this roundup of various races. But I'll be back next weekend with more race analysis. I hope to see you then, and thanks very much for listening.